it's about understanding where your audience is and the listener behavior and the viewer's behavior and where they want to go and and where they're going to go and view/consume your content. So when you have both options, then you can see what the analytics and the statistics are on each side of them, and you can make a decision that way. Because here's the thing, you can have an audio podcast, right? But you cannot have a video podcast without the audio. You need the audio in order for the sound to appear on your video, right? So you kind of need to have both. And if you, my advice to my clients and all of anyone I talk to is you're going to sit down and record your podcast anyways, right? So you might as well just turn on the video while you're doing it.
Hi everyone, I am Manali and I'm back with another episode today. I am here with my friend Simona Costantini, the founder and CEO of Costantini Productions, which is a podcast production agency. I have been following Simona's journey ever since I got into podcasting world. Simona is a huge inspiration, and she also has an exclusive membership for aspiring and growing podcasters. It's called the Podcast Success Vault. You must check it out. The links are in the description. Being an early adopter of podcasts, she started her podcast back in 2018. It's called the Happiness Happens podcast. Let's see what Simona has to say about the opportunities Happiness Happens has brought her.
So starting Happiness Happens, my first podcast, because I have two of them. So I have Happiness Happens and I have another one called As It Relates to Podcasting. And that's like an industry podcast to help people learn how to podcast and market their show and all that. But when I started Happiness Happens, I started at the end of 2018 and then the beginning of 2019. And at the beginning of 2019, when I launched the show, I was so nervous and it was putting myself out there in a completely different way. And when I launched the show, I had no idea how my life would have changed in that time afterwards. So the podcast started out with just solo episodes, and I would just talk about different things and, things that I was learning in terms of like fear and mindset and confidence and all of that stuff, right? And after that, I decided to bring on guests, different entrepreneurs, to learn from them and hear their stories and their journeys and all of that. And like what I like about Happiness Happens is that it's grown, and the evolution of the show has changed so much since I started it right in the beginning. And then I decided to go on like a little bit of a hiatus for the show. And then I came back with this perspective of understanding what happiness means to other people. And through all of these conversations, I have met so many new people. I made connections with people that I never would have ever been able to meet in quote unquote real life, you know what I mean? Like just day-to-day life without having that podcast. And it brought so much opportunity in terms of, the direction of my life and what I would do from there. Because what happened was I started this podcast, and to me, it was just a podcast. And then people started to ask me, well, how did you do that? Can you help me launch my podcast? Can you teach me what to do when it comes to launching a show? Can you teach me how to market it? Can you teach me how to grow it? And in the beginning, I used to do it for free. Like I just used to help people, and I was like, yeah, sure. I was like, here's what I did. Here are all the steps. And then I just decided the world shut down in 2020, and I lost my job. And so I went full force into building out my business, and I launched my services. And it was funny because I sold out those services in the first 24 hours.
Wow.
72 hours. First 72 hours
But
of
2020 has
still.
been a game changer for everyone.
Yes. And I think it's about the perspective and the way that you look at it, right? Like it was a very hard time, but it also was a very life-changing time, as it should be, right? Because when big things happen like that, we get to choose how we want to look at them and how we want to respond to them. And so we ended up launching our new services in 2021, the beginning of 2021. And I brought on 5 new launch clients, all of them except for one I still work with today, which is amazing. And
Wow.
we launched their shows, and 2 or 3 of them, I believe it was 2 or 3, were past podcast guests of my Happiness Happens podcast. And so it's funny how we never know how the connection in life is going to happen and why we meet certain people when we do, and ultimately how that transforms our life as we move forward. So I feel like it was just a really catalytic point of my life starting that podcast. And then once I started it, you just lean in more into the things that feel scary for you, and you just keep going. So that is my happiness happens story.
Happiness actually happened for you through the podcast.
It really did. It really did. And then from then, it's allowed me to, create this production business that I have today. Meet amazing people, just like, our conversation we're having today. Go to different conferences and speak on different stages, and have a business that allows me to live the kind of life that I want to live every single day.
Why did you not start a YouTube channel? Why did you jump to podcasting? Like many, those who get started, they always have this dilemma. Why not YouTube channel? Why podcasting? And it's hard to grow both. I'm not saying one is easier than the other. So yeah.
Good question. So I actually do have a YouTube channel now for Happiness Happens. And when I started the show, though, I didn't have a YouTube channel for it because I didn't understand it. I didn't understand YouTube. I didn't know how it worked. I didn't know how my content could be maximized on that platform. And it was a little bit, I feel like YouTube was a little bit of like a different landscape at the time. It wasn't so many podcasts on there at the time. It was more like it was just starting, and I didn't record with video in the beginning. So the whole first, I think, year of the podcast was only audio. And then I started doing video. And I did upload some of the audio tracks and stuff like that to YouTube. But really is because I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know where to start, and I didn't know how to create a strategy on YouTube in a way that would make sense for the content that I was putting out there. Now you have YouTube shorts, you have, longer clips in your episodes that you can pull out. You put the full episode out there, and then you can put supporting content on top of that, right? Like you can put all kinds of stuff. And so for me, it's just been a lot of, since having Happiness Happens, the landscape of podcasting has changed so much. But today, if you launched a podcast, I would recommend do it with the video. Even if you don't post the video, you want the video for the clips, because that's how people see your show. That is how the best marketing happens. And it's not to say that the audio can't be leveraged to use for the marketing side. It's just about looking at the trends and looking at marketing as a whole and seeing where are those different trends, how are they present, and how does your content fit into that market even if you don't have video, because you can still do video, right, without having a video-based podcast. You can put B-roll, you can put a photo, you can put a picture of a sunset or a video of a sunset and put text over it or put your audio over it. Not to dive into the whole marketing side, but to get back to your question, I didn't know and understand YouTube in the beginning, and then I learned. I taught myself, and I'm glad I did. And I will say this too, the platforms are completely different. An audio podcast and a video podcast are very different. And the audio version has its own specific type of listeners, and the YouTube version has its own specific type of viewers. So typically people have their own listening.
What is the difference? But could you double click on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So people just have their own preferences of where they want to listen to their content, right? I like to listen to my podcasts on Apple and my music on Spotify, and I watch tutorials on YouTube. I'm not going to sit and open YouTube and watch an hour-long podcast on YouTube, because I would rather put it in my ears while I'm going around, blah, blah, blah. But depending on what the type of content is, some people will sit down and watch the entire video, or they'll play the audio in the background because YouTube is their favorite platform to consume content on. So it's about understanding where your audience is and the listener behavior and the viewer's behavior and where they want to go and where they're going to go and view/consume your content. So when you have both options, then you can see what the analytics and the statistics are on each side of them, and you can make a decision that way. Because here's the thing, you can have an audio podcast, right? But you cannot have a video podcast without the audio. You need the audio in order for the sound to appear on your video, right? So you kind of need to have both. And if you, my advice to my clients and all of anyone I talk to is, you're going to sit down and record your podcast anyways, right? So you might as well just turn on the video while you're doing it.
Yeah. When you're watching a video, it's more likely that your brain is active, especially if it's a longer form of content, than
Yeah.
it's audio. Because in the case of audio, I think every time that I listen to a podcast and it's a audio only podcast, I'm either cooking,
Yes.
doing cleaning,
Yes.
and so it's more likely that I'm less attentive in some of the portions which might be more interesting. But when it comes to video, it's not that I'm switched off because the video is engaging in itself.
Exactly. And that's a really good point. I mean, there's so many times, even when I'm listening to an audiobook, for example, I'm like, oh, wait, I'm like, I have to rewind. Like, I wasn't even paying
Yeah.
attention. Like, what did they say? But for video, people are fearful of video. People don't like being on video. People don't like the sound of their voice. They don't like the way they look on camera. They're worried about people judging them. They're worried about, what if someone makes fun of me for putting this out there? And it's all, in my experience, fear-based, right? And it's also takes more work, right? You show up on video and you have to look more presentable. Your hair has to be, you don't have to look perfect. You don't have to have all this makeup on. You don't have to be, whatever. But and again, it depends on your brand, but like for my own brand, for example, I show up without makeup on all the time on my videos, and that's fine. But I'm not going to show up like, with my hair in a crazy mess and like all this, so video takes more intention. Whereas audio, you just sit behind the mic and you don't even have to worry about anything because it's just you and the microphone. But video is you, the microphone, and the camera, and everybody watching. And it's also this piece of like, you can have, some people need a script, right? Some people want to script their podcast and they want to read off of their script. And when you have video, you need to make sure that you have a teleprompter or something to help you do that. And so there's so many nuances between audio and video. And I think people just get overwhelmed with video and they're like, I just don't want to do it because I don't know where to start. But really, it's just about taking it step by step and breaking it down in a way that feels easy and consumable for you to actually take that next step into creating a video podcast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
And it
I
doesn't have to
think,
be perfect. It doesn't have to be
yeah,
perfect.
it
The
doesn't
quality of
have
your
to be
camera,
perfect.
it doesn't. It really does not.
It's not about editing or something. What I really suggest is you record the video, don't post it anywhere, not even on social media. You go and watch it back and, take notes of what you could have said better. If you made some expressions which weren't good while the guest was speaking something, or you're checking your phone. And once you have all those notes, then I think you'll be less fearful next time. And then eventually you'll get to a stage where you'll be confident posting video online.
I love that. That is a really, really, really good advice. I hope everyone took notes in that because that's a really good piece of advice. And you know what? That is something that I'm guilty of. I don't go back and I don't go back and watch my videos and I don't go back and watch my content because I am one of those people that doesn't like the sound of my voice and I don't like the way that I look on camera, but I do it anyways because I know that that is what I have to do, And if you
So
want to
how
stay
do you
relevant,
how do you reflect on your mistakes? Like, how do you do that?
that's a really good question. I feel like I've learned a lot over the years of how to make the conversation. How do I word this? In the past, when I used to do interviews, so I used to listen back to the audio because I used to do all of my own editing and stuff like that. I don't do it anymore. And what I learned in that time was how to conduct a good interview. So I used to be someone who would sit and I would interrupt my guest all the time because I was so excited about what they were saying that I wanted to add in to what they were saying. And that's not a good strategy to take because then you're interrupting your guest and you're blocking what they're going to say and all of that. And so I picked up on these little nuances from like an audio side, and I try and be very aware and cognizant of those now. And I will say from the video side, I mean, I'm one of those people that I worked in media for about 10 years before I started doing my production company.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, I worked in like communications and marketing and all that, and we did a lot of video content and a lot of video production, and I've seen myself on camera a lot over the years, and so I know what, like, and even now, like even in our interview to like right now, I know that like I'm like, oh, okay, I gotta roll my shoulders back, like, you know what I mean, like, oh, I'm slouching again, or oh, maybe I'm making a face or whatever, and I'm constantly like aware of those things just because it's kind of ingrained in my mind. But for someone who might not be aware of those things, your advice is really, really, really good. And it's not that I don't think that I have, it's not that I think that I have everything perfect now, because I think we're all a work in progress always. But I think it's about remembering those little things and being mindful as you're doing different interviews and conversations. Like if you're smiling when you're talking, people will hear the smile in your voice through the mic, right? If I'm sitting here like this and like slouched over and all this stuff, people are going to see that. So
Monotonic,
yeah,
monotonic
exactly.
voice.
Exactly.
It
So there's a
sometimes
few.
happens when I'm editing a client's episode. The guest is monotonic, and I just sleep. I literally fall asleep, and then I have to go back, rewind, and you know.
I've done that. And you wake up and you're like, okay, the episode is done, but I don't know where I left off. Mhm.
And some guests are like super comfortable. They are more comfortable than you expect them to be. They go on rambling. They are talking about themselves. And how do you handle such guests?
That's a good question, because I've definitely had my fair share of those. I think it just comes down to finding the break in the conversation when they're talking and being like, oh, yes, I totally know. And then I hear you because da 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 whatever. And then what do you think about this? When it comes to this, sometimes I do like a little bit of prep in advance too. When it comes to authors, especially because authors, all they want to do is get on the podcast and talk about their book and like the journey to getting to the book. That's not my interview style. So sometimes if authors want to come on the podcast, I just make it clear and I just say, yep, no problem. Sounds good. When I have authors on the podcast, we will talk about your book, but we will talk about it at the end, and we don't need to talk about it the whole time, So I kind of set that expectation a little bit, because I don't want to talk about your book the whole time. I want to talk about you. I want to talk about your thoughts on this, not the book's thoughts on this. I want to talk about your thoughts on this. So authors, I feel like, are like the hardest sort of, not the hardest people to interview, but it's just they're so streamlined in their mind of all of the topics that they want to hit on and touch on. So yeah, that's definitely one thing that I would suggest.
Oh, this is so cool, Simona. You told me you went on a hiatus with Happiness Happens. Many people podfade at such times. So for people of those kind who aren't sure whether or not podcasting might be for them, or they should do something else for marketing. So would you suggest guesting on other podcasts, or would you still suggest them to have a podcast?
It's a really good point. So I think that I don't think that everyone needs a podcast. I think that it has to make sense for you, for your business, for your dreams, for your goals, for your purpose, right? If it's going to be, because here's the thing, when you market something, right, you typically have one main piece of content, like one large form piece of content, whether it's a podcast, a YouTube channel, a blog. Those are typically like the big three, or like a newsletter, like a very active newsletter. So you tend to have like one main piece of content that you pull a whole bunch of things out of, right? When you have that, that is how you create your content for everything else that you're doing. And so if a podcast does not make sense in your strategy, you don't have to do it. But if you're going to do a video, channel, like a YouTube channel, and like do all these videos, you might want to just consider taking the audio and ripping it out of the file and uploading it to a podcast platform, So I think that, again, not everyone needs to have a podcast. If you want to have a podcast, I think you need to understand why. Why do you want to have a podcast? What is that podcast going to do for you? How is it going to add value into your life, into your business? Are you creating it just because everybody else is, or are you creating it because somebody else wants you?
Once I've
right?
been on just sorry to interrupt, but
No,
I've
please.
been on a call with prospect, and he told me he wants to have a podcast because his competitors are having a podcast, and I was like, what?
And like,
I don't jump in the well because my friends are. So
exactly. Exactly. And like, you need to like understand why you are creating that podcast and what is it going to do for you, because the mistake I think that people make is they don't realize how much work it actually is to have a podcast. One episode could take you about 6 to 8 hours a week. Do you have that time in your schedule, right? So let's say you want a podcast. Do you have that time? If you don't have that time, okay, who's doing the editing for you? Who's doing the social media content for you? Who's doing all the uploads for you, right? And then that's kind of where...
And video editing is a
And the
whole...
video,
it takes more time than audio, actually.
Exactly. And that's when you can look into different production companies. What makes sense? Do you have the budget for it? Do you not? So like, you need to figure out how it aligns to your strategy, and then also how you're going to support the management of it afterwards, because that's how people pod fade, right? You don't have the process and the system in place to support you after you've launched your show, so you have really no idea how you're going to keep it going every single week, right? And on the flip side, I look at guesting. I think guesting is such a good thing to do. I think it's great. It's a great way to get your message out there. Some people are just prefer doing that. And so I think there's a place for both of them. The guesting side is more public relations, right? Like it's more PR for you, for your business, your brand, your book, your whatever it is that you're launching.
And you
And
don't have to do the edits. You
exactly.
have the same edits though.
Exactly. Well, that's interesting though. I unless there's something like really, really, really terrible in it, we don't listen to guest edits. Like I never send the file to the guest for them to review it before it goes live. When you go, unless there's something critical that needs to be removed, when you're a guest on a podcast, like what you're sharing is what you're sharing. You know what I mean? Like I don't think that, I don't know. I just try and limit that a little bit, I guess. Because then it can cause a lot of chaos and a lot of back and forth.
That
Yeah.
is true, but when it's businesses, and lately we
Right.
had a security compliance person coming to one of my clients' podcast, and she was like, "This needs to be removed. This is a
Yeah.
secret. This is not meant to be
Yeah.
public."
And that makes sense. That stuff is totally fine because like yes, absolutely, but when it's stuff like, well, I didn't like the way that I answered this question. It's like, you know what? Like at
You
some
want to
point,
redo it?
no.
You okay?
I was just saying like in general, like when
Okay,
when
okay.
someone No. I just mean like when someone's like, "Oh, I didn't like the way that I answered that. I didn't like the way that I said that." Like, it when I don't know. Sometimes when you take too much out, you lose the integrity of the conversation too, right? So, I understand like in our agency, we look at everything through the lens of like, if this episode got out and like leaked to the media and like whatever, would it completely destroy you and your brand? If there's things in there that would, absolutely we'll remove them. And then if not, we leave them, you know?
What else do you think they need to do or they can do to just move away from the stress of producing episodes every week?
Okay, I think that the organization piece is actually one of the biggest pieces, and it's one of the most important things. And with that, in my opinion, comes having a production schedule. And I think that you need to know like which episodes are going out when, and that will help you record in advance. So I think in addition to systems and processes and being organized in that way, I think being like strategic sort of in when you're going to record. Like I have some clients who record like 1 month, they'll do like 15 interviews and then they'll just like let them go. You know what I mean? So they'll kind of batch record.
Batch.
Yeah, and so they'll record like once a quarter and so on and so on. I try and do that with Happiness Happens. So like I'm always a few episodes ahead at least. And then with as it relates to podcasting, I record in a 2-hour block for the entire month. So I make sure that, over a 2-hour, over those 2 hours, we get those 4 episodes in so that the content is done and it's good to go. So those would be my biggest tips, would be like, again, like those systems and processes, and then also making sure that you have a production schedule so you know what is going out and when, and you don't get like lost or confused on your dates or anything like that. And then recording in advance and getting those guest interviews or even those solo episodes done in advance.
You simplified it so much.
Thank you.
Like I see people writing bullets and bullets and bullets, and when I got started I read so many blogs about this, and I'm like, oh my god, this is like such a big thing, because I have pod faded myself, so I really
Oh,
think
I
it's
hear it.
huge.
I, I hear that. But I think too, the thing is like, I think we overthink it. It's really not that hard. It's more just, the further ahead you can get, the more episodes that you can record in advance, the more time you'll have to produce them, and keeping yourself like, I think another thing too would be like putting a time block in your calendar to get all of the work done. Same day, same time every single week that you do your podcast. That's what I did in the beginning with Happiness Happens. I would block one specific, evening, because I was still working in corporate at the time, and I would book one specific evening every single week, and I would get everything done. I would do all the editings, all the social media and everything. And then on the weekends, sometimes on the weekends I would take like, an extra couple hours and I would try and get ahead. And then eventually you get ahead. And if you stay consistent with getting ahead, then you just become further ahead than you were before. So I think that's a really important piece too. If you
Makes
have
sense.
extra
Makes sense.
time, just edit another episode. You know what I mean? Like do it while you're instead of watching a Netflix show, or instead of, wasting your time on something else, just edit another episode. And then, I don't know, that's just my mindset, but
That's why it sustained from 2018 to
yeah,
2023, 5 years.
exactly. Exactly.
Okay, now most podcasters want an ROI,
Mhm.
right? And they look out for monetization options.
Mhm.
So how do you think they should approach this? Do you have like a good give us a good starting point for monetization?
Okay, so I think if
Monetizing
you're
podcast. I'll rephrase it. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think if you're looking to make money quick, podcasting is not for you. I don't podcasting is not the platform where you just go into the industry and go into the space and start making all this money. It's really about, again, I go back to like strategy. What kind of content are you putting out there, and how does that relate to your overall business? So if you are creating content that is in support of a course or a program or a service or something that you're putting out there, how are you creating and strategizing your episodes to support the launch of that course, or to support the sale of your program, or all of those things, right? So what I like to do, and this is why it goes back to like the part we were just talking about, taking a look at which episodes you're putting out there, and then also align that to the your marketing plans for your business or your venture or whatever it is that you're doing. So then you know exactly what episodes are going out, you know what your marketing goals are, and then you can align them and you can create a strategy within your podcast to help support that bottom line. So when it comes to sponsorship, I rather look at it as partnership instead of sponsorship. Partnership allows you more opportunity. So partnership is, yes, I'm going to do a an ad on my podcast. I'll blast it in my newsletter. I will do a couple of social media posts about it, and so on, right? So I think that it's really important to just take a look at all of those different pieces and see how they work cohesively together. And I think it's a myth that, a show with lower downloads can't make money. It's just, again, about finding if partnership or sponsorship is the route that you're wanting to go, what are the products and services that you should be pitching or selling on that podcast, on that episode, and how does that relate to your audience, and why are they going to buy? Because at the end of the day, brands and companies just want people to buy their stuff, right? And so how is your show the fit for them to be able to do that? You don't need to have hundreds of thousands of downloads to make money from your podcast. I monetized Happiness Happens twice when I had really low downloads. And it was what it was, and it was great,
What
and
do
it
you
worked out
define
great.
by low? What is your low?
I think I had like, I don't know, like 20, 30 downloads an episode,
Okay.
which was, I mean, for me, that's low. I don't know. But like,
It is.
it is lower, right? Like, I was like, well, I don't want to be rude, but like, it's not like, it's, yeah, anyways. But yeah, so that's what I would say about, that. I mean, the ROI piece is challenging, but you got to look at it in a strategic way, just like anything else, just like launching a program, just like launching a course, just like launching anything that you've created. How do you intend to make money with those things? So then also, how do you intend to make money podcasting? Again, all of the components matter, right? You have podcast episode. How are you marketing the episode? How are you impacting and changing the conversation with your episode? So there's so many different pieces. So that's where that
Are you
consistency
in touch
piece.
with your guest after you have conversed with them?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And are they sharing the episodes for you? Are they helping you spread the word? Are they helping, tap into a new market? Are you asking for the sponsorship, right? Are you going into places like, for example, I have a client, and she works in the grief and loss space, and she started working with this organization, and she's looking for a sponsor for her show. And I said, well, why don't you just ask them? Right? And it's the fear of the ask. And she doesn't ask because she's fearful of the response. But the worst they're going to say is no,
No.
right? And then you just have to ask. Like, you just have to put the fear aside, and you just have to do it. If it's something that you really want, then just do it. But I think that understanding the marketing piece behind it is really important.
I understand. Now that you have touched on the downloads, let's dive deep into analytics.
Oh boy. Okay, let's go there.
Podcast analytics aren't up to the mark. This
No.
is my complaint. This is your complaint. This is every podcaster's complaint. And what do you think is the right time to start nerding on analytics?
Okay, so I like to look at the analytics after 7 days, 30 days, and 90 days. You can see that in your hosting platform software. I put all my podcasts on Libsyn. I can literally click on stats and I can see how many episodes were downloaded in 7 days, 30 days, and 90 days. Perfect. But you also want to pay attention to like the completion rate. So you want to log into Apple Podcasts. So podcastconnect.apple.com, I believe, is the URL for it. And you want to go in and you want to look at what is the completion rate of the episode. How many people are listening through till the end? Where do people tend to drop off? How many plays do you have in that specific time period? And all of this data, although podcast data is harder to sort of decipher and go through, I think it's important to pay attention to. But, I really don't, for my own podcast, I look at it for clients because clients want to know, but for my own podcast, I don't really care, as long as the show is growing and as long as, here's the thing that I've learned as well. The show only grows as much as you want to show up for it. Right? So you're going to see an increase of downloads if you start creating content that's relevant to the episode and content that, helps you grow your own self and your own personal brand. So as you continue to grow as a creator or a company or an organization, then in turn, so will your podcast because you're growing the amount of people that you are impacting every day. And then when you're doing guest episodes, you're tapping into new markets, right? So it's about looking at your growth strategy that is aligned to your marketing strategy, and then how are those numbers performing. If you're doing solo episodes and you're never a guest on any podcast and you're just doing a couple of posts here and there, you can't be surprised if you look at your downloads and they're not as where you want them to be, right? So you got to go back to the source.
Yeah. And so now that we are into marketing, how often do you think podcasters need to rethink on their podcasting strategy?
Every 3 months. So I like to give everything 3 months to take a look and see how is the strategy performing. I do it for PR, I do it for podcasting, I do it for marketing, I do it for email marketing, program launches, like everything. You need 3 months to see the actual results of something. Because that's giving you a big enough sample size. It's the same thing with digital ads, all of it. It's giving you a big enough sample size so that you can see what the trends and the performance was over that 3-month period. So 3 months, every 3 months I go in, we do an analytics report, like a quarterly report. We'll go and take a look. We'll take a look at the strategy. We'll take a look at the graphics. We take a look at everything. And if something needs to be fixed or refreshed, or if a trend has changed or something like that, then we address it. Some of the trends and stuff, especially on social media, we will take a look at those and we'll address those pretty much in real time. Like if something is changing right away, like we'll go in and change it. But then we take that into account when we're doing the review at the end of the quarter.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Also, there's one thing that podcast, I've seen many people like us talk that releasing more episodes really results in more downloads. How true is that? I don't think it's completely true.
I don't think so either. Because if you're putting out episodes and the content isn't good, it's not going to convert, right?
Or it's a cookie cutter content.
Yeah, like if it's the same as like everybody else's stuff, like, and this is where it's like the job as the host to get a different angle or to get a different perspective out there, because especially if you're interviewing an author, let's say an author or someone who's launching a program, like they have very specific talking points that they're going to stick to. How do you get it from a different angle? Not in a way that's like, using it to be like clickbait or anything like that, but how are you getting a different angle that is going to bring a different level to the story, right? Instead of just getting the generic answer, I don't want the generic answer. I want to go deeper, So I think that's really important to remember.
I have one good question for you. When it comes to YouTube and the world of YouTube, the gurus say the title, the thumbnail needs to be catchy and clickbaity, not completely clickbaity, like it should drive the click. And then there's also this parameter called watch time, which is very important. When it comes to podcasting world, what are the parameters, like the top 3 KPIs that podcasters need to hit
Got it.
to become a success?
Okay, so I think again, making sure the title has keywords in it that people are searching for, and writing things in a way that people are searching for them is really important. You also want to make sure that you have the author in there, like the author of the episode, because that's all searchable. Like everything is searchable in a podcast app. Making sure that your show notes are actual show notes, and like it's not just in this episode we talk about this. It's like, a couple of paragraphs explaining what's going on in the conversation, because all of that is searchable. I like to have timestamps and pull out key points within the episode, so that people can see, okay, we're talking about this at the 4 minute mark, and this at the 8 minute mark, and this at the 12 minute mark, and whatever. So those things are really important. And then I think having links, you would be surprised like how many podcasts don't put links from their guests and stuff like that, and ways to connect and take the conversation in a deeper way. And then also I think the actual description of your show, like your show description and the categories in which you put yourself, are really important. You want to make sure that you are in the right category for where your show is, because then that helps everything else that you're doing. So making sure that you have episode titles that are things that people are going to search about the topic. So one place that you can look is it's a website called Answer the Public, and you can put a topic in and it'll phrase questions for you, like how to podcast, when to release a podcast episode. So like those kinds of things will give you a bit of a framework and a better idea of how to craft your titles. And you want to make sure that they're enticing, and again, you want to make sure they have keywords. And I also like to tag the episodes on the back end on the hosting platform using the same keywords that are in the episodes as well. So those are some of the things. I don't think you need episode specific cover art. You can if you want to, but like I just think it's an extra thing that is really not necessary in my opinion.
Exactly. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover.
Yay.
Thank you so much, Simona, for all your inputs. It was lovely chatting with you. I hope to collaborate with you more in the future.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me today.